Hi guys, and welcome to today's video, which is me basically going through a list of plants I have used in natural terrariums, and I'm just going to tell you whether they're good or bad, whether I'd recommend them or not. I'm pretty sure these can work with a range of reptiles and amphibians, mainly those who live in sort of damp, humid environments, especially geckos, especially the ones that come from New Caledonia as well, because all of these I've used with crested geckos, and I know a lot of the plants they can use, a lot of the other geckos can as well. However, if your gecko isn't a crested gecko, I would just double check before you use these that they are actually safe. So yeah. So the list is fairly long, so I might be a little bit brief on some of these, but there's no particular order to this list, I'm just going to go straight through it. So the first plant is the maidenhair fern. This one didn't do well with my crested gecko. It seemed to die kind of quickly. I don't know if it's to do with the watering or just because if the gecko jumped on it, it would just fall straight through. This may work if the maidenhair fern is up in a planter, up in the background or something, and it's just causing lots of nice shade. It may work for smaller animals, but for me, this just didn't work. Next, we have the Guzmania and sword bromeliad, and actually any of the little bromeliads you get that you can just stick into the background. Bromeliads seem to do really well in terrariums. The only problems with the Guzmania and the sword is once they've sort of bloomed, once they've got their colour, they sort of just slowly die after that. So you'll notice the colours will fade and they're producing pups. Now, I've never been successful at growing these pups, so as much as I love the bromeliads because the geckos will drink out of them and everything, they are a little bit, they have a short lifespan, so they're good, but just be aware of that. Next is the Earth Star bromeliad. This one is certainly a fighter. It can survive some of the harshest conditions. So basically I had an Earth Star and I put it in a planted terrarium. Well, I used Eco Earth and that wasn't very great for the plants that I had in there, and it dried out really quickly and it didn't do well. I was using like lots of succulents and I wasn't very experienced with succulents at the time. Basically everything kind of died and I forgot about the terrarium because I thought everything was dead in there. A year later I go to empty it, because this is, you know, I forget about things. I go to empty it and the Earth Star is somehow still alive. And when I first showed you guys it was kind of shriveled up, and since putting it in the terrariums it's now flattened out like it's meant to be. But I would definitely recommend the Earth Stars because they're really hardy, super easy to care for, and yeah, they're quite a different, interesting thing to add into your terrarium. Then we got air plants. Now, I'm grouping these all together because I got a load from ProRep, I think they are, and they did not do well. They do not do well in tanks that get misted often. They just get all shriveled up, and unless you really know how to look after air plants, then go for it and do that and it will look awesome. But for someone, if you're starting off with a terrarium or you're not very experienced with air plants, maybe avoid them. I definitely wasted far too much money on them. Then we're going to look at house leeks. Some people call these hens and chicks. Basically, they're a type of succulent. I wasn't very experienced with succulents. I've only started to learn really how to care for them. I thought you were meant to spray the leaves when you're not, and you're only meant to water them once every now and again. And this just did not work out well in a tank that had to be misted like twice a day. If you were going to use it for an animal from a more arid environment, even maybe a leopard gecko, some of the succulents I have heard are safe, and since they don't have to be watered maybe only once a week or once every 2 weeks or so on, they could really work. But in a terrarium where it needs to be misted a lot, not that great. However, a snake plant, which I believe is a succulent, but I'm not 100% sure, but I think it is, they do really, really well. Now, once again, I only water these ones every 2 to 3 weeks. Completely dry soil all around them, but they survive. They just do not like too much water. And especially with crested geckos, they'll just sleep in the plant and they are perfect. You just want to make sure they're in a designated area where you know you're not going to miss down too much. The next plant is a polka dot plant. I'll group this with the FITTONIA as well because they're very similar in sort of the way they look and the way they grow and their size. Both plants do excellent in my terrariums. They go really quick, they're really pretty, they both provide a nice pop of colour. The only thing I will say is if a gecko falls on them, they sort of tend to bend. They don't necessarily break. They can deal with a gecko falling on them once in a while. I would say is make sure whatever animal you are building the terrarium for, make sure they have plenty of things to climb on so they can sort of avoid falling on the plants. Then we have PILEA. I have 2 different species of these, and they, once again, they do really, really well, thrive in the environment. I definitely recommend them. Then we have a dragon tree. I tried this in Isla's tank. It really didn't grow. It didn't do well with being misted a lot because it started to get the yellow and brown spots on its leaves, and I personally wouldn't recommend it. I think especially in smaller tanks it takes up too much room. It looks cool because it has a little tree trunk. You think, oh, that'll work for my gecko. But just for me, it did not work out and I wouldn't recommend them. I certainly wouldn't use them again. Then we have the moth orchid. This one was totally fine. It was in bloom in Isla's tank for quite a while. And then I went to move it one day because I was adding some new plants in and it snapped. And so this is what usually puts people off orchids. 1, they're usually expensive, and 2, they're quite delicate. The next plant is a vanilla orchid, completely different to the moth orchid. I love this plant. Generally it thrives in the tank, but lately it hasn't been doing too well, and what's interesting is it's only been doing bad since I swapped the water I'm using. So before this I was using tap water that I let out for like at least 24 hours, and that worked okay with the plants, but I wanted something a little less harsh, so I used bottled water. And since then the vanilla orchids have just sort of they just have dulled in colour, they're not really growing, so I may have to just give them tap water, which seems so weird. You always hear that tap water is so bad for plants, but for them I might need to. But I would definitely recommend vanilla orchids. They're really hardy, they grow really quick, and they're a great vining plant. Then we have the African violet. I'm going to group this with the velvet plant. Very similar problem with these. If you get the leaves wet, they pretty much die. It's really annoying. So I tried the velvet plant in Isla's tank. It died within the first week or so, just because a tiny bit of water got on it. So as awesome as these look, and the nice pop of colour and the interesting leaves, they just are so delicate for a tank that gets sprayed often. But once again, maybe in a tank that is more for an arid environment animal, maybe they'll work in them. And then we have the Australian ivy. I believe this is its nickname. It has like a proper long name. And I tried this in 2 different terrariums, Isla's and Lyra's. And in Isla's tank I planted it straight in the ground in a shaded area. And with Lyra's I planted it in the cork planter where it's, there's partial shade but there's quite a lot of bright light. And the one in Isla's tank pretty much died, and the one in Lyra's tank is doing awesome. So I like it. I think when it's quite big and it's all grouped together, it's like a pillow. Like if the gecko goes on it, it doesn't really damage the plant, and it's quite soft and nice. But I wouldn't probably plant it straight in the ground again. I would definitely recommend planting it in a planter up in the background, because that seems to work really well. Then we have some other ivies with like the golden pothos, devil's ivy. I have 2 different species and they both do really, really well in the tank. The only problem with ivies is you've got to watch out that they are safe for the pet that you're using them for, and also that you don't leave feeder insects in the tank, because 1, they're probably going to eat a lot of your plants, and if they eat the ivy and the animal then eats the insect, that could be toxic, because a lot of ivies are toxic if you eat them. And if you are catering for an animal that eats plants, you probably don't want to put ivy in there. Then we have the lucky bamboo. No problems with this. I think it's a nice feature, a different texture, different thing to look at in the tank. My 2 are still alive, so yeah, I would recommend that. And finally we have the ANTHURIUM. I like this one. It gives a pop of colour. It has broad leaves that makes a nice shaded area. I haven't had a single problem with this. It's doing really well in Lyra's tank, and I would definitely recommend it. Now I can breathe. Jeez, I had to get right through that really quick. I was just like, I don't want this video to be too long, but I hope this has helped. Obviously do your own research to double check about some of these plants, but I've used these all in my crested geckos tank, and I know they are safe for crested geckos. So thank you very much for watching, guys, and goodbye.